What if I told you that the entire history of the legendary Knights Templar, as you know it, is a lie? Not entirely, but its most crucial part. We are told of holy warriors, ascetics who took vows of celibacy and dedicated their lives to God. But what if beneath their impeccably white cloaks lay a secret so shameful and dangerous that its revelation destroyed the greatest order in history? They were richer than kings and more powerful than the Pope himself. Their enemies feared them, and their friends respected them. But they had one major vulnerability, one not written about in textbooks, and the name of this vulnerability was woman. In this video, we won't be talking about battles and treasures. We'll peek behind the curtain, into the dark cells where at night warriors carved wooden horses, into secluded forest homes where their secret wives awaited them, into the eyes of children who had no right to bear their father's name. How did an entire system for concealing illegitimate children operate? Why did commanders turn a blind eye to this? And how did the Order's most powerful enemy use love and family, turning them into a weapon, to present hundreds of knights with a monstrous choice: betray their order or condemn their own children to death? Prepare yourselves. We will tell you not a story of warriors. We will tell the story of their greatest sin. A story that proves even the most sacred vows are powerless before the human heart. And it is this forbidden love that perhaps became the Order's only chance at immortality. The cold stone of the chapel pressed against his knees, chilling him to the bone through the coarse fabric. But the young man named Luke didn't notice. His entire world narrowed to the flame of a single candle on the altar, its flickering light snatching the stern faces of saints from the gloom on the frescoes and the steel blade of the sword lying before him. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of incense, wax, and ancient dust. This was his last night in his old life. Tomorrow he was to take his vows and become a brother of the Order of the Temple, a Templar. What did he feel in that moment? Awe. Yes, fear, undoubtedly. But deeper, beneath layers of prayer and repentance, lay a completely different tremor. He recalled not lines from Scripture, but the laughter of a village girl by the well, the warmth of her hand which had accidentally touched his at the fair. He tried to banish this image, like a sinful haunting, but it returned again and again, vivid and alive. Was this truly the main trial? Not dragons and Saracens, but a simple smile from a woman capable of tearing down the wall of faith he had built for years. His mentor, Brother Theobald, a man whose face was etched with scars and wrinkles, had told him, "The flesh is weak, my son, but a spirit forged in prayer is stronger than any steel." Easy for him to say, who had spent 30 years in the deserts of the Holy Land, where the only woman was death, constantly watching from behind every stone. But here, in flourishing France, life itself was a temptation. Every spring day, every sip of young wine, every troubadour's song, all of it cried out about earthly joys from which he was to renounce forever. And so dawn arrived. The heavy oak doors swung open, letting in the gray morning light. The ceremony was majestic and solemn. Dozens of brothers in white cloaks with crimson crosses stood in motionless rows, their faces like stone masks. As Luke, repeating the words of the oath, uttered, "And I promise chastity," it seemed to him that the very walls of the temple shuddered. He was renouncing not merely women. He was renouncing the continuation of his lineage, the warmth of a home, a son who might inherit his sword, a daughter whose braids he would play. He was sacrificing not only his own future but the future of all who might descend from him. This vow was not merely a rule. It was the Order's foundation. A Templar was not to think of inheritance, of lands for his children, of advantageous marriage. All his thoughts, all his energy, all his gold were to serve one purpose: the defense of the Holy Sepulchre. Family was a vulnerability. Love was a weakness an enemy could exploit. But then, kneeling and kissing the cold cross on the sword's hilt, he did not yet understand how prophetic these fears would prove. He believed he could pluck earthly desires from his heart, like a weed. However, he did not yet know that some roots run so deep that an attempt to pull them out could shatter the very stone in which they had grown. This was merely the first battle in a war that would last his entire life, and the most terrifying temptation was yet to come. 5 years passed, 5 years of prayers, training, and relentless discipline. Brother Luke became one of the best. His hand did not falter in battle, his word was harder than stone, and his white cloak remained impeccably clean, at least. That's how it seemed to everyone else. But beneath that cloak, in the deepest recesses of his soul, he carried a secret heavier than any chainmail, a secret that could in an instant transform him from a hero of the order into a despised oathbreaker. It all began 2 years ago, while escorting a caravan of pilgrims. Their camp was attacked by brigands. The Templars repelled the attack, but one of a noble lady's maidservants was wounded. Her name was Isabella. While tending to her wounds, Luke, for the first time in many years, allowed himself to look at a woman not as a faceless shadow, but as a person. He saw in her eyes not temptation, but fear and gratitude. And this gratitude proved more dangerous than any passion. One conversation led to another, and soon he realized he awaited these brief encounters more than daily mass. It was madness, and he knew it. But he could no longer stop. Now, every few months he would find a pretext to leave the commandery. Officially, for collecting tithes or inspecting the order's lands. Unofficially, to ride an extra 20 leagues to a small house hidden deep in the forest. He bought this house through a proxy, using funds that, according to the order's rule, belonged to the order. Every beat of his heart resonated with fear. Every rustle of a branch seemed like the footsteps of a commander on his trail. Paranoia had become his constant companion. Only after assuring himself of safety did he allow himself to relax. From the next room came the babbling of a child. A small boy wobbling on unsteady legs toddled towards him. His son, Jean, a child who by all laws of God and man should not have existed. Luke knelt, and the massive battle-hardened warrior, feared by Saracens and respected by kings, transformed into a simple father. He scooped the little boy into his arms. The boy trustingly wrapped his tiny arms around his neck and laughed. And in that moment, for Luke, there was no order, no vows, no fear. Only that laughter existed. He pulled from his tunic a small wooden horse, which he had carved at night in his cell, whispering prayers for forgiveness. But looking into his son's eyes, he did not feel like a sinner. He felt alive. However, this fragile happiness was built on a lie. Every smile from his son, every kiss from Isabella, was a nail he himself hammered into the lid of his future coffin. He did not yet know that this double life was merely the beginning of his downfall, and that the most terrible price for his secret would not be paid by him alone. Fate was already preparing a blow from which neither sword nor prayer could protect him. To the outside world, Isabella was simply a widow living on a secluded farmstead. Neighbors, if any existed in that isolated place, saw her as a modest, reclusive woman who rarely left her home, and lived on the means left to her by her deceased merchant husband. None of them could imagine that no merchant husband had ever existed. Her life, her home, every piece of bread on her table, all of it was part of a grand deception, woven from love and fear. What did she feel when a heavy knock on the door came at an unscheduled time? Her heart seized with terror. Was it him, or was it them? The people in white cloaks coming to take everything from her. Her home, her son, her life. She lived in constant tension, listening to every rustle outside the window. Her world was a gilded cage. Yes, she never lacked for money. Once a month, a man with a covered face, without speaking a word, would leave a pouch of silver on her doorstep. She knew these were Luke's people, silent cogs in the order's vast machine, carrying out a secret command. But what were these coins worth? She couldn't go to the market and laugh openly. She couldn't befriend a neighbor, fearing she might let slip her secret. Every new person was a potential threat. Her son, Jean, grew up in isolation, knowing no other children. How was she to explain to him why their uncle, the noble knight, only visited at night and never stayed until morning? How to explain why she flinched at every knock on the door? This secret poisoned every moment of her motherhood. Sometimes, looking at her reflection in the well's surface, Isabella asked herself, who was she? The mistress of a holy warrior, a sinner who had ruined his immortal soul, or simply a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't understand? She was not the only one. Across Europe, similar solitary homes were scattered, housing similar quiet women raising children with the eyes of their Templar fathers. Were there noble women among them, rescued from Saracen captivity and falling in love with their saviors? Yes. Were there daughters of wealthy merchants whose fathers were glad to be connected, albeit secretly, to a representative of the powerful order? Undoubtedly. They formed an invisible secret network, a silent sisterhood of women whose destinies were inextricably linked to the cross on the white cloak. They were simultaneously the Templars' strength and weakness. Their existence gave the knights what they had renounced: love, family, human warmth, but it also made them vulnerable. Luke brought her not only money and gifts for his son, he brought fear, In his eyes she saw not only love, but also perpetual anxiety. He was a knight of Christ, yet he behaved like a thief stealing moments of happiness. Isabella understood that this life could not last forever. A fragile world built on lies was bound to collapse someday. But she could not imagine how terrible that collapse would be, and that the wreckage of their secret life would bury not only their love, but the entire great order beneath it. Little Jean grew, and with each passing year, his existence became more perilous. He was the living, breathing proof of his father's sin. A blessing for Isabella and Luke, he was simultaneously their curse. The boy didn't understand why his life was so different from the stories his mother told him. In fairy tales, princes always had king fathers who lived with them in the same castle. His own father was the mysterious Uncle Luke, a mighty giant who appeared from the night, brought exotic toys and smelled of iron, leather, and distant roads, then vanished just as mysteriously with the first rays of the sun. For a child, this secret was simply a given, but for adults it was a ticking time bomb. What would happen when the boy grew older and started asking questions? What would happen when his face fully formed? Even now, Isabella, with a pounding heart, saw a frightening resemblance to Luke in his features. The same jawline, the same piercing gaze of gray eyes. While he was a child living in forest seclusion, this was unnoticeable. But take him to a town, place him next to any other Templar, and the resemblance would become obvious to any observant bystander. Their son was a walking condemnation. The fate of children like Jean was tragic. They were ghosts, bastards of the Holy Order of Knights. They couldn't be acknowledged, yet the Order often couldn't abandon them to their fate either. Where did they go? The most fortunate, whose mothers were of noble birth, might be adopted by childless relatives, passed off as their own. Others, like unwanted pups, were left on the doorsteps of monasteries, with a generous donation provided to the abbey for the foundlings' upkeep. Boys often became squires to other knights, sometimes even to their own fathers, who treated them with outward severity, concealing pain and love beneath it. They grew up ignorant of the truth, feeling only a strange, inexplicable attachment to the stern warrior who never called them son. But what if a child was a spitting image of his Templar father, who held a high rank? That was a catastrophe. Such a child had to be hidden as far away as possible. They were sent overseas to distant commanderies in Cyprus or Acre, far from the prying eyes of the French or English court. Their lives were an eternal exile. They were the curse of their birth, an unwitting threat to their fathers and to the entire order. Luke, rocking a sleeping Jean in his arms, felt torn apart. He looked at the innocent child's face, and understood that his love had condemned this child to a life in the shadows. He had given him life, but taken away his name, taken away his right to be proud of his father, and the most terrifying question tormented him at night. What would he do when the boy turned 10, 12, 15? Hiding him in the forest forever was impossible. Sooner or later, the secret was bound to be revealed, and then the choice would be monstrous. Either disown his own son, or be dishonorably expelled from the order and perhaps put on trial. He thought he was controlling the situation, but in truth he had long lost control. His fate now lay in the hands of this small, unsuspecting boy. If the story of Luke and Isabella were an isolated case, it could be attributed to the tragic fall of one man. But the truth was far more sinister and widespread. The sin of individual knights had, over time, transformed into a systemic problem, a cancerous growth that the order tried not to cure but to conceal. This was no longer merely a chain of personal tragedies, but a well-oiled machine of concealment operating at all levels of the hierarchy. How was this possible? It all began with tacit consent. The commander of the local commandery, a stern veteran like Luke's mentor, could not have failed to notice the strange and frequent absences of one of his best knights. He could not have failed to see inexplicable expenditures in the account books. But what was he to do? Report a brother he had known for 20 years? Condemn him to disgrace and possibly to expulsion? More often than not, he chose another path. He simply turned a blind eye. It was an unwritten rule. Don't ask, and you won't have to lie. The honor of the uniform, the honor of the order was paramount, even if preserving it meant tolerating internal rot. But silence was just the first level. Next came the Templars' renowned financial might. The order was not merely a military brotherhood. It was the world's first international corporation, an ingenious banking network. And this network, created to finance the Holy Land, was perfectly suited for clandestine operations. Were there secret accounts? Not in the modern sense, but there were ways to transfer funds such that tracing their final destination was virtually impossible. Money donated for the construction of a chapel could, on paper, go towards purchasing fodder, but in reality, transform into that very pouch of silver left on Isabella's doorstep. Lands, houses, entire farmsteads where secret families resided were registered under proxies. A loyal servant, a distant relative, a friendly merchant, who was indebted to the order. It was an entire web of deceit involving dozens of people. The order's lawyers drafted fictitious deeds of gift, and its managers ensured that widows and orphans lacked for nothing. This was no longer just aid to a sinning brother. It was a corrupt scheme that permeated the order from top to bottom. And the higher a Templar stood in the hierarchy, the more opportunities he had to conceal his double life. If a common knight like Luke risked everything, a provincial master could maintain a secret family for years, and no one would dare question him. This system fostered a monstrous double standard. In public, the Templars were paragons of holiness and asceticism. In their sermons, they condemned carnal sins and worldly attachments. Yet afterward, that very same commander who delivered the sermon might sign an expenditure order, knowing that the money would go toward the upkeep of one of his knight's bastards. They lied not only to the world. They began to lie to themselves, justifying it as the greater good and preserving the order's honor. But a structure built on systemic lies cannot be strong. It becomes as fragile as glass, and one strong blow is enough to shatter it into 1,000 pieces. And that blow was already poised to be struck by the order's most powerful enemy. The dawn of Friday, October 13, 1307 was cold and merciless. Across France, as if on a single signal, agents of King Philip the Fair stormed the Templar commanderies. The Great Order, which for 2 centuries had been a pillar of the Christian world, was decapitated in a single night. Brother Luke, like hundreds of his brethren, was seized in his sleep and thrown into a damp dungeon. His white cloak was bipped off, his sword confiscated. No trace of his former grandeur remained. But the most terrible blow was yet to come. For a week he was held in darkness and hunger. Then he was brought for interrogation. Opposite him sat not a rough soldier, but a man with soft hands and eyes as cold as ice, Guillaume de Nogaret, keeper of the royal seal, the chief architect of this downfall. He didn't shout or threaten torture. He spoke quietly, almost amicably. He laid out scrolls of accusations on the table, worshipping the idol Baphomet, renouncing Christ, sodomy. Luke listened to this nonsense with contempt. He was ready to die, but not to incriminate himself and the order. Nogaret saw it in his eyes. He paused, then, changing his tone, uttered a single sentence that struck Luke harder than any whip. "We know about the farmstead near the Amiens forest." Luke froze. The blood drained from his face. His entire world crumbled in an instant. Nogaret, savoring the effect, continued, sifting through papers, "Isabella, former maidservant of the Countess de Montfort, and the boy Jean, he's 7, it seems, very much like you, Brother Luke." This was the end. All the years of conspiracy, all the lies, all the fears, it had all been for naught. The king knew. He knew everything. He didn't just want to destroy the order. He wanted to do it at the hands of the Templars themselves. Torture could maim the body, but it might not break a warrior's spirit. But the threat to family, that was a weapon against which there was no defense. "The choice is yours, Brother Luke," Nogaret purred insidiously. "Here's the quill. Sign the confession to all heresies, and no one will ever know that a pious Templar had a bastard. The woman and boy will live out their days in peace. We'll even take care of them. But if you persist," he didn't finish, but in his icy gaze, Luke read everything. He imagined soldiers bursting into their forest home. He saw the terror in Isabella's eyes. He heard his son's cries. He would be accused of sorcery, she of cohabitation with a heretic. The pyre awaited them. In that moment, Luke understood the devilish genius of the king's plan. Their main, most shameful sin, which they had so meticulously hidden, became the perfect instrument for their destruction. Their love, their humanity, their weakness, all of it was weaponized against them. Dozens, hundreds of knights across France faced the same choice, and many broke. They signed any, even the most absurd confessions, saving not their own lives, but the lives of those they secretly loved. The Great Order did not fall under the blows of Saracen swords. It was destroyed from within by its own carefully concealed sin. The love that gave them the strength to live a double life became the cause of their demise. The fires of the Inquisition died down. Grand Master Jacques de Molay ascended the scaffold and his curse found its targets. The Order of the Temple was disbanded, its wealth confiscated, and its name covered in shame. History, it seemed, had drawn a close. But what became of those not written about in papal bulls and royal decrees? What became of the thousands of Isabellas and little Jeans scattered across Europe? What happened to the living legacy of the Templars, their secret families? When the Order's colossal machine collapsed, the system of support and concealment ceased to exist. Women and children, who just yesterday had been under unspoken yet powerful patronage, were left alone to face a hostile world. Their fates varied. Some, deprived of their means, fell into destitution. Others, saving themselves and their children, hastily married, forever burying their past lives under a new name. Still others, the most fortunate to whom the Templars had managed to transfer some funds, simply disappeared. They changed their names, moved to other countries, Scotland, Portugal, Switzerland, where the persecutions were not as brutal. They vanished into the centuries, taking their secret with them. But could such a powerful bloodline simply vanish without a trace? Could children raised in the shadow of the Great Order simply forget their father's legacy? It is precisely here, in this gray area of history, that the most enduring myths are born. Legends of secret societies that are supposedly direct descendants of the Templars. Freemasons, Rosicrucians. What if their founders were not surviving knights, as is commonly believed, but their grown sons, children who their entire lives heard whispers from their mothers about great fathers, immense treasures, and a betrayed faith? What if they, united, swore to preserve and multiply what even the French king could not destroy? Consider this. The Templars' greatest treasure was not gold. It was their organization, their knowledge, their global network. And this knowledge of finance, geopolitics, power could well have been passed from father to son, albeit secretly. Perhaps the Templar bloodline was not broken. Perhaps it simply receded into the shadows, exchanging the white cloak for a business suit and the sword for a pen to sign treaties. The story of Luke and his son Jean has no end. We don't know what became of them. Did Luke sign the confession and save his family at the cost of his honor, or did he choose a martyr's death, leaving them to their fate? Their story, like thousands of others, was lost in the mists of time, but it forces us to ask the crucial question. When we speak today of the Templar legacy, what are we truly speaking of? Of castle ruins and old legends, or something more real and alive? Of an invisible thread of blood and secrecy that perhaps stretches through the centuries and has survived to this day, and the Order's greatest sin, its love for its secret children, might ultimately have been its only chance at immortality.